Hey guys, it's Rosa here. I hope you're all having a really lovely day. I'm here today with a tutorial video for you all about making your own really simple, beginner-friendly slip dress. This is a really perfect project for beginners, and I thought it'd be a really good one for if you're looking for a last-minute New Year's Eve dress. Actually, it's really nice for layering up for winter as well. It's quite on trend, looking over worn over a polo neck or something like that. So let's get started. The pattern I'm going to be using is New Look 6499, but you can use any simple slip dress pattern that you have around at home. This is just the one that I had. This is actually one of their newer pattern releases, so you can still get it now. I'll leave a link to it down below, and it's just a really basic pattern. The fabric I've chosen for this is this really nice leopard print viscose. I'll leave a link to it down below. It's still available. It's I think it was £4 or £5 per metre. It's a real bargain. And the reason I've chosen this is it's nice to, if you're making a slip dress, to use a fabric that has quite a lot of drape. So something like a viscose or a silk or maybe velvet would work really well. So before you get started on your slip dress, the things you're going to need are 1 metre of your chosen fabric. You'll need some iron-on interfacing in a medium weight. You will need some pins, some fabric scissors. You'll need some thread, and of course you'll need your paper pattern. So we've gathered all our tools together. I think we're ready to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is grab our paper pattern out of the envelope and select the pattern pieces that we're going to be needing. I'm not going to use the overlay or the little sleeve on my one. I'm going to just literally use the front, the back, the wider straps. There's 2 different widths which come in this pack. I'm going for the wider ones. I'm going to use the front facing and the back facing. Once you've cut out your pattern pieces, it's time to start doing some cutting out of our fabric. So I folded my fabric in half, making sure that the stripe on the leopard print runs down the fold. You can see here, which is why my selvages haven't perfectly matched up, because I really wanted that stripe to go down the middle. But of course, if you don't have a pattern like that on your fabric, you can just fold it with the selvages touching. I'm going to pin on first my front piece, so the front of the dress. And on this piece it says cut on the fold, so you can see I'm going to pin that straight edge all the way down along the fold. I'm going to secure that in place with lots and lots of pins. After I've pinned up my front piece, it's time to go to my back, which is my other big piece that I'm using. And as you can see here, I'm using a tape measure to check that the piece is lying straight with the grain line. So on the pattern piece there's a long arrow, and I'm going to measure that to make sure it's the same distance away from the grain line all the way down the pattern piece, and I'm going to secure that with pins as well. Once those pieces are pinned in place, it's time to get cutting. So I'm going to grab my fabric scissors, cut them both out, making sure I mark on any darts or notches. You can see here I'm going to be pinning the dart in place on the bodice front. This dress is a really simple one, but there are a couple of good sort of features which you can practice when you make this dress, one of them being darts. So you can see here I usually mark out the end of the dart where it is, and I do that with just a little notch with the scissors. Once I've done those little notches, I stick a pin in the point of the dart and I put it all the way through, and I do that on both sides. Once I've made the point and the 2 ends of the dart, which I've marked with notches, I'm going to take off my pattern piece and actually pin that dart together, making that triangular shape. So I'm going to match up those notches I've just made and then go up to a point where the pin is, making a triangle shape for my dart. So you can see here where I'm going to be sewing, I'm putting a line of pins which creates that, again, that triangle shape which gives the bust its shape. And once I've got that all pinned in place, it's ready to be sewn. But it's not time to head to the sewing machine just yet. I'm going to be cutting out the rest of my pattern pieces, starting with the straps. So you can see here, I'm just using a thin strip of fabric that was left over. The straps don't use up much fabric at all. Again, making sure it's level with the grain line, I'm pinning on this strap pattern piece and cutting it out. After my straps, I'm using the scraps fabric which is left over to cut out my back facing and my front facing. You will notice that the front facing is also cut on the fold and the back is cut in 2 parts. Something really important about those facing pieces is that we also are going to cut it out in interfacing. So I'm going to be getting my scissors here. As you can see, I've pinned the back and the front of the facing pieces onto my white iron-on interfacing. I'm going to just cut those out. Once you've cut out your interfacing, I'm going to head over to the ironing board. You can see I've put a tea towel on here with different types of pasta on it. I'm going to iron on that interfacing to the facings for the front and the back, making sure the iron's not too hot so you don't melt the interfacing. Now it's finally time to get to our sewing machine, so by now I'm really excited, ready to get going. The first thing we need to do is some stay stitching, which will stay in your garment even after you finished it, and it's literally just a simple straight line of stitches, and you do that along the top of the bodice. I'm going to set my machine to a straight stitch. I'm going to go right ahead and do that all along the top of the front and the top of the back pieces, so it's just along where the neckline would be, and then that same line at the back. The reason you put this stay stitching in is to make sure that those don't stretch out, because that won't look very nice on your finished garment. Now that I've finished my stay stitching, I'm going to go to those darts which I pinned in earlier when I cut out my bodice front. I'm going to be sewing in those 2 darts. Now that my darts are sewn in place, I'm going to give them a quick press on the ironing board. I'm going to move on to the back of my dress. So as you can see, the back is cut in 2 parts. I'm going to be pinning it together right up the middle, up what was called the centre back seam. I'm going to put some pins along there. Now, how many pins you use is completely up to you. Of course, if you're an experienced sewer, you might just want to do maybe 4 or 5 along the length of the back, but if you're new to sewing, you might want to do lots, whatever works for you. Something really important to remember if you have put lots of pins in is to take them out as you sew along. So now that I've pinned up my centre back seam, I'm going to go right over to the sewing machine, and using a straight stitch, I'm going to be sewing up that line. Once I finish sewing my centre back seam, I'm going to finish the raw edges. So you see I'm just going to open up the seam which I've just sewn, and you can see the edges are fraying. I'm going to set my sewing machine to a zigzag stitch. I'm going to go right along both of those edges to make sure they stop fraying. Now we can see our dress is starting to come together, which is very exciting. So I'm going to actually put my dress front and my dress back together now, with the pretty sides facing inwards, so the right sides together. And I'm going to pin it up all the way down both side seams. Once I've pinned my dress together, I'm going to set the machine back to the straight stitch and sew the dress together at the side seams, going all the way up both sides. Once my dress is sewn together at the side seams, I'll switch back to that zigzag stitch and again zigzag the edges just to make sure the fabric doesn't fray. Some people do like to use an overlocker for this, so if that's your preference, then of course you do whatever works for you. Now it's time to move on to our facings. I'm going to grab those facing pieces which I interfaced earlier, and I'm going to be pinning them together at the side seams so you can match up those notches. And you can see here I'm just pinning them together. Once you've pinned your facing together at the side seams, we're going to go right over to the sewing machine and sew that up on the left and the right sides. Once those side seams of your facing are joined together, we're going to join together the centre back seam on the facing in exactly the same way. Now I'm going to change back to that zigzag stitch and zigzag all those raw edges on the facing. And then finally, just to finish off our facing, before we attach it to our dress, we need to finish off that raw edge, which is the bottom edge of the facing. So what I like to do is just turn over a really narrow hem and sew that with a zigzag stitch. Some people again like to use their overlocker to do this bit, or just do a plain narrow hem. It's really, again, completely up to you. I like to use a zigzag stitch with a fabric that frays a lot, just because I don't want it to fall apart. Now that I've finished with my facing, it's time to move over to our straps. So I'm going to grab my straps that I cut out earlier. I've still got the pattern piece pinned onto it pretty thoroughly, actually, looking at this now. I'm going to take that pattern piece off, and I'm going to make 2 tubes. So I'm going to fold the fabric straps in half and pin right down that straight edge to create a tube. Now I'm going to go back to my sewing machine, switch back to my straight stitch and sew them up into 2 long tubes, which will become our straps. Now I'm going to make sure my straps aren't too bulky by layering that seam, so that what that means is really simple. You're just going to cut one of the seam allowances down to half the width, and that just means that when you turn it around, you'll have a lovely flat strap. Now I'm going to grab my safety pin, and using my safety pin, I'm going to turn the strap the right way around. So I just attach it to one end, push it all the way through the middle, easing it through gently, and out the other side, so I have 2 straps. Once I've done that, I'm going to head back to my ironing board, give the straps a press, and while I'm there, I'm going to press open all the seams that I've done so far. That's the side seams and the centre back seam, so I'm ready to attach my facing. So here you can see the top of the dress as it's going so far. It's looking really, really good. So what I'm going to do first is pin my straps in place. There are little notches on my dress and on the straps, so I know where to match those up to. So first of all, I'm going to pin the straps to the front of the dress. Once I've pinned the straps in place on the front, I'm going to turn my dress over and pin them in place on the back. It's quite easy to get your straps kind of twisted up at this point, so just make sure, like, hold it up in the air, check that they're flat at this point. Once my straps are in place, I'm going to grab my facing piece and pull that down over the top of the dress, making sure that it goes over the top of the straps, so the straps are sandwiched in between the dress and the facing. Once I've got that in place, I'm going to put lots and lots of pins to hold the facing in place on top of the dress and the straps, and that means going all the way around the neckline, around the back, and also down the underarm, so it creates one big complete circle. When it's all pinned together, it should look a bit like this. Now I'm heading back to my sewing machine, I'm switching back to my straight stitch, and I'm just going to sew all the way around, attaching that facing to the dress. When you finish sewing all the way around in your facing, it should look a little bit like this, and it's ready to start turning around. So here you can see I've grabbed my scissors, and what I'm going to do is cut off the corners, all 4 corners, to make sure those turn out nice and easily. I'm also going to be clipping all the way around the edges of the facing, sort of clipping those curves so that it will sit really nice and flat. Once you've clipped all the way around in that seam allowance, it should look a little bit like this. And it's ready to flip around the right way. This is when it gets kind of exciting because it starts to look like a dress. So now we're going to be understitching, which basically just means we're going to be attaching the facing to the seam allowance. And doing this, it sounds like a really strange thing to do, but it actually stops the facings from popping out of the dress and it helps them to stay inside. So it's a really simple thing. You can see here I'm showing where I'm going to do my understitching. I'm going to go head straight over to my sewing machine, and as far as possible, because you can't go all the way around with your understitching because the straps get in the way, I'm going to be doing my understitching And the final step is to turn over a very narrow hem. It's a good idea to give this a quick press before you sew it. And I'm doing a really narrow hem because I think on a really thin fabric like viscose, it just looks a bit smarter. And that's it, your slip dress is finished. I do hope this video was helpful, guys. If I've left anything out or if anything's a bit confusing, please do just leave a comment down below and I will try my very best to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and click subscribe for new sewing vlogs and tutorials. I hope you have a fantastic week. I'll see you again very soon. Bye!